So hello and welcome to our Family Inclusion in Nutrition through Engagement, or FINE, community of practice. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Stephanie Martin, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Nutrition at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the US. And I've been co-facilitating this community of practice with Neha Javeri from USAID Advancing Nutrition for the past couple of years. Unfortunately, Neha is traveling today and unable to be here with us. But I just wanted to acknowledge all the work that she's done to help keep this community of practice going. People are still joining, so I'm trying to admit them. So if you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat. Today, we will share an update on the FINE COP plans for 2024, and then we will hear from our presenters from the University of Zambia and USAID Advancing Nutrition, who will discuss key considerations for engaging men in maternal, infant, and young child nutrition programming. After the presentations, we will have time for questions, followed by small group discussions, where we'll be able to share experiences and connect with others who are interested in engaging families in nutrition as part of smaller breakout groups. So as some of you may know, the USAID Advancing Nutrition project is coming to an end, but we wanted to let you know that the FINE community of practice will continue to be hosted by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We will continue to have quarterly meetings, share research and resource updates, and also host our listserv, which has more than 700 members from all around the world. And we can use this listserv to share information and also to ask questions. And we also have a YouTube channel where we are hosting all of our past and future meeting recordings. And so if you've missed anything and would like to see those meetings or recordings or share them with anyone, those are available. And we'll send out an email after this meeting today with all of those links. So while the FINE COP is focused broadly on engaging all family members, today we are sharing a report from USAID Advancing Nutrition on key considerations for engaging men. I'm delighted to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Oliver Mweemba is a faculty member at the University of Zambia in the Department of Health Promotion and Education. He has conducted research on men's roles and engagement in the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV and antenatal care, as well as research on masculinities and power dynamics, and conducts nutrition implementation research. Dr. Kavita Sethuranam is the Director of Nutrition and Humanitarian Contexts at USAID Advancing Nutrition. Kavita has more than 20 years of experience working on maternal child health and nutrition and has expertise in exploring and describing the linkages between gender and nutrition. Lesley Oot is a technical advisor with USAID Advancing Nutrition, and she has more than 15 years of experience supporting global nutrition and health programs. She's currently leading research and resource development to support the implementation of quality, integrated, holistic programming for women and young children. Oliver, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I'm just going to show my video in the few remarks I'll give. Yeah, so as Stephanie said, so I've been working on issues around male involvement, male participation, men's participation. There's been quite a lot of different terms that have been used, and I think it's something we also need to actually pay attention in terms of like the language we are using in this kind of scholarship and its implications in terms of what we want to achieve. So, but basically, yeah, I've been involved in that. And then maybe my few remarks, and my role is actually just to facilitate the discussion by my two colleagues who go in detail to talk about what they want to talk about. But basically, maybe just some kind of reflections, having been involved in this kind of work. Of course, originally I've been working more involvement, men involvement in the context of sexual reproductive health, and particularly prevention of mother to child, as well as antenatal care. And of course, this is something that evolved out of trying to push an agenda to actually really prevent transmission of HIV to children. And of course, it was recognized that we can't win the battle because even when a woman is actually tested HIV negative at the beginning of a pregnancy, they still convert because they're using so much attention and men remain untested. So I think the red flag started actually coming up in the early HIV treatment and prevention program. But as we saw, actually, it was not enough. Actually, we needed to actually really expand to the whole broader cascade within sexual reproductive health. So family planning programs also had an interest to see how men, and of course we saw that they were actually stumbling block, and of course many other aspects. And now, of course, for me, I'm new in nutrition, trying to see how men and family members can actually play in this landscape. But I think the issues still remain the same. So one of the things I think which we need to pay attention to is clarifying the terms we use and the discourse that informs these terms and how actually they can impact on what we are trying to do. So I think we need to actually really clarify some of those. And I know there's quite a lot of literature that has been debating when we talk about involvement, what do we mean? When we talk about participation, what do we mean? And how far can we go? Is it the same for all the different components in maternal child health? Or in some, maybe not, maybe in some we can actually just inform. So there's been all these kind of debates, and I think I would like to think that there's no size fit all, and I think it's all contextual depending on this context and cultures and all that kind of stuff. So I think maybe that's something we can actually deflect on. And then maybe the other thing that I can want to actually really comment, of course, is in having just like browsed through the report, so the term that is used is the risk that actually comes with actually engaging men, and how it has potential to sort of more or less like compete with the agenda of trying to get women to have agency on various aspects, to be able to make decisions that affect them. But of course, because of the roles that men have been playing at family level in the context of traditional gender roles, which we are trying to transform, we have actually realized that we can't actually really win this battle without bringing in, and hence the idea of transformative gender programs in the context of nutrition and broadly maternal child health becomes essential. Of course, how we do that and the tools we use, including the terms, the frameworks, some of them are actually developed and have a very deep masculine undertone. So we need to actually really think through patriarchal undertone on how they can actually create some of the inconsistencies that we may actually see as we do this program. So I think continuously monitoring what we use and how we are measuring things, and whether we are actually really using patriarchal tools that actually sort of reverse the role, and in the process it threaten the autonomy of the women we are trying to actually really get to involve. So I think a bit more careful thinking around that. So I think we need to actually really see how that goes. And within that transformative agenda, of course, how as men are sort of like losing their traditional power, how probably some of them are coping. And we know some of it has been linked to, the loss of power has been linked to gender-based violence, and also even them trying to actually really shift some of their masculine role to things like alcohol and which of course is linked to itself to gender-based violence, but also multiple sector relations. As they lose power, they want to demonstrate in other areas. So how do we actually really, as we do this program, look out for such? So, and of course, last but not the least, this carefully looking out how male involvement threatens women's autonomy. Because I think at the end of the day, of course, we are trying to bring men as partners to work with women, but on what grounds are we trading? Are we reinforcing men's role? Are we actually trying to strengthen men's power in the process to create gender inequalities? I think those are some of the issues we probably need to think a bit more. And I think those are probably my few remarks. And I want to hear what actually the reflections will be and in the context of the report that my colleague will actually talk about. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Oliver. It's a really nice introduction to some of the themes and topics that we'll be talking about next. Now I'll turn it over to Kavita.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to provide you all with a little bit of background. I saw on through the chat that we do have some of our colleagues who work on resilience food security activities and work with USAID BHA funded programs as well. So just by way of background, this work is something that we've done and prepared for the USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. And typically this bureau funds community-based resilience, food security, and nutrition programs. And they're typically in highly vulnerable contexts in developing countries. So they're often in lower income countries, in areas which are more at risk for instability and our fragile contexts. And this is sort of the areas in which these programs are being implemented. Since 2008, BHA, which was previously one of the two offices that became the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the former Office of Food for Peace, prioritized gender integration in their awards, and this led to much more a focus on male engagement. So this was something that they felt was quite important, given that they were working on nutrition and food security. Women were not always gaining access to resources and didn't have control over resources. So it became sort of self-evident for them that engaging men was an important aspect of the work, but gender integration was sort of prioritized for that particular reason. Since that time, however, most of the projects and activities that have been implemented have really focused on what to do to engage men, and much less on how to engage men in a manner that's both a win-win for men and women, just like Oliver was mentioning, what is the win for men as well? How do you also do activities that promote women's agency and empowerment without undermining, what men gain in the process? And how do you ensure that this programming is done in a manner that reduces risks for women? This has resulted in instances where, with this focus on trying to engage men and focusing more on the what and not the how, we have had instances where the quality of programming is not optimal or gender transformative. And at times, as Oliver mentions, this has also increased the risk of gender-based violence. So there are cases where the emphasis of what you're doing in programming is much more around trying to ensure that men get the same information as women, but not necessarily emphasizing the roles that men have in the context of optimizing or improving women's agency and empowerment and improving nutrition as a part of that as well. So now we have more learning on how to do this better because we've had a series of programs that have been implementing these activities for some time. And we had the opportunity to undertake this activity and wanted to share some of the key considerations with you on what we learned and share what we found in this technical report. Next slide, please. So as I noted, the key gap was that there is that while there's an increasing interest in engaging men to improve maternal and child nutrition, there is a need for more evidence and guidance on how to engage men safely and effectively. So in essence, how do you do so without increasing risk for women in these very high risk environments? So what we did was we drafted this report. It's now available on our website, that really looks at how to engage men in maternal, infant, and young child nutrition while also mitigating risk. The methods that we used was really to use some key informant interviews with key experts in this area, both who work on these types of projects, but also outside of them who are experts in their own right, as well as a literature review of the most recent evidence. And with that, I think I'll hand over to my colleague, Stephanie.
Thanks, Kavita. So I'll start off by talking about what we meant and how we defined male engagement in the context of maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. And this, Oliver really highlighted the importance of having a clear definition of what we're talking about when we say male engagement. So before sharing what we've learned, I wanted to share this definition, and it really builds off the work of others who have talked about male engagement within other contexts. And so within the context of maternal, infant, and young child nutrition, male engagement is intentionally including men, both individually or with their partners, families, and communities, to actively challenge gender norms, address unequal power dynamics, and meaningfully participate and share in the responsibility of maternal, infant, young child nutrition behaviors and outcomes. And research shows that intentionally engaging men in nutrition can lead to fathers who actively participate in promoting and protecting their partners' and children's nutrition, health, and well-being, feel emotionally connected to their children and partners, and provide related emotional, tangible, and informational support, share responsibility with their partners for caregiving and household tasks, make decisions together with their partners and support their partners' autonomous decision-making, and resolve conflicts in a constructive and peaceful way, and contribute to care and respectful family relationships. Through our review of the literature, as well as our interviews with key informants, we identified a wide variety of activities that are being used to engage men in maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. And they've been conducted at individual, couple, family, and community levels. And this figure shows examples of activities and approaches to engage men at each one of these levels, and highlights the importance of recognizing men's different roles, both with the household and the larger community. We note that men can be partners, parents, program participants, as well as agents of change, and they can be engaged in different ways across each one of these levels. And it's important to implement activities that engage men in multiple ways, that both support and reinforce what they learn as individuals as well as in groups. Now I'll turn it over to Lesley.
Thanks, Stephanie. So now I'd like to get into a little bit of the specifics of what we found in this report. So we outlined a couple key design considerations from this research that we conducted. So first and foremost, it's important to engage women and ask them if and how they would like men to be engaged in these activities. Now, this is particularly important in areas where there are high rates of gender-based violence. So making sure that women have a voice and have a say about how and when you engage men is critical. Next, we need to provide opportunities for family and community participation throughout the life cycle to ensure that activities engage men to really reflect the context and community priorities throughout the process. It's also important to conduct a gender analysis in the first year to understand existing gender norms and inform contextually appropriate activities to engage men. And then design activities that are grounded in women's empowerment and promote women's leadership. So even though we're working with men, we need to have women's empowerment and leadership in our minds. And we really need to make sure that women are protected from harm, and that activities are designed to minimize risk to women. It's also important to really leverage what men are already doing. Most men want their wives and their children to be healthy and to have good relationships with them. So really need to build off of those strong connections. This includes identifying opportunities for integration. So if possible, use existing platforms that already engage men, such as community groups, community meetings, and then integrate nutrition into those activities. So you're not starting from scratch, so we say. It's also important to reinforce social and gender norms that encourage men to become supportive and caregiving partners. And not only working with men on this, but women too, to see men's role as men as having a role to be supportive and caring. It goes on both sides for both men and women. And then importantly, we need to acknowledge men's unique needs and develop content that is specific to their experiences, beliefs, and motivation. What works to engage and support women will not necessarily work for men. So you really need to design activities that specifically reach men and fit their needs. Lastly, of course, design activities with sustainability in mind. Plan how gender transformative approaches and related outcomes will continue after a project ends. Sorry, Stephanie, next slide now. So this review also determined 4 key implementation considerations as well. So the first was to train staff and others responsible for the intervention to reflect on their own gender attitudes throughout the project lifecycle, thinking of how do their beliefs and ideas that they have prior to working on this activity, how does it influence how they do their job and what they are doing. Next, implement activities for men that promote reflection, dialogue, and skills for improved communication and relationships, and that seek to transform harmful gender norms. Fostering positive dialogue and communication is really key. Next, identify men who support gender equity to serve as role models and champions in their community. And lastly, implement activities that engage men in multiple ways. Engage them as individuals, within other groups of men, such as we mentioned with existing community groups, and then also engage them with other women and other family members. So there's a full family dynamic. Next slide. And lastly, the review identified 4 key monitoring and evaluation considerations. Namely, monitor the experiences of both men and women participating in project activities, with a particular focus on women's autonomy, gender norms, decision-making, and gender-based violence. And incorporate principles of collaboration, learning, and adaptation into all activities that engage men. It's really important that you're learning and monitoring what you are doing so you can make changes as needed, and you can share that learning and that implementation learning with others. It's really important to continue to build this evidence base. Next, ensure that programs use evidence to adapt activities so they're appropriate throughout the life cycle. So again, using evidence and building that evidence. And lastly, include both men and women when collecting data to understand their unique needs and experiences. Next slide. So lastly, I want to close by sharing 2 key messages that emerge from this work. First, engaging men can improve myosin, which is fantastic, but it's not without risk. So designing, implementing, and monitoring interventions that engage men should really focus on do no harm principles and preserving and promoting women's agency and safety. Thanks very much. Now I'd like to pass things over to Oliver, who will begin our Q&A session. Thanks.
Thanks, Lesley.
Apologies, struggling to unmute. Oh.
Sorry,
Can
Oliver,
you hear me?
please go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you so much. A very insightful piece of information. So I'm going to invite the audience to ask their questions, clarifications, or add whatever they add. But maybe as they are coming, just to actually maybe get home, just for clarity purposes, maybe just 2 questions. So if you were to actually pick up what you can call good cases or examples of what you would call effective approaches for engaging men in this kind of way, what would you actually really give, particularly that works in context where nutrition challenges are great? Thank you. I'll ask the other one when it's related, but maybe as you answer, there may be no need.
Oliver, could you repeat the question because I couldn't hear it clearly?
Okay, you're able to hear me?
Yes, a little softly, but a little louder would be nice. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try again. Yeah, so I was saying, would you actually maybe give, just for clarity purposes, you may have said something, what are some of the examples of what you call effective approaches for engaging men in nutrition in the context of maternal health, particularly that will really apply in contexts like where I am here, Zambia, where we are actually struggling with malnutrition challenges. Over. I don't know if you heard me.
Yes, we did. Thank you, Oliver. That was very helpful. Thank you for repeating the question. I can start, and maybe Lesley and Stephanie, you can also add. When you mentioned sort of what are some good examples, there actually is a great example from Mozambique with one of the implementing partners that does activities, particularly on male engagement in that context. And I think this was actually done in partnership. The original work was done in partnership with Concern Worldwide, but a main focus was finding ways to engage men in the context of nutrition-related activities, but to do so without really increasing risk for women. So this did involve doing peer-to-peer activities with men, but I think that the approach that they used was quite different in the sense that there was not only sort of raising awareness, but there was a much greater emphasis on emphasizing what are men's roles and playing a supporting role so that women can more optimally provide and fulfill their caregiving roles. And that shift, I think, was very helpful because previously men were often getting the same kind of information that women were getting, which didn't specify what kind of role they needed to play, and they didn't know what they needed to do. They just understood that nutrition was important and that many times, because of the existing social norms, women are the ones who are primarily responsible for providing care to children. And so if something doesn't go right, it's usually the women that they blame. But by shifting the focus on sort of saying, how do you engage men in a manner that shifts and, places the emphasis on their shared responsibility, that changes the dynamic a little bit. So there are really great examples within the region where in East Africa and West Africa as well, where the approaches have started to change and they're starting to be more gender transformative, if you will. I'll stop there and let my colleagues add.
All right. And if there's no addition from your colleagues, maybe just one last one from me. I see there's a question in the chat that will come to it. So there's something in your report you call do not harm principle. Do you want to say a bit more about that and maybe contextualize it in the context of in real life examples of the challenges you may have encountered as we do this kind of work?
Sure, I can definitely start and give a good example that's somewhat more concrete. So this is actually from many years ago, where one of the interests for one of the USAID programs was to integrate and engage men in these activities for nutrition. And without really having a lot of experience on what to do, the primary activity was, we're giving women on how to breastfeed their children. So we should also tell men that their wives should breastfeed their children. So men basically got the same information. And then when we did some research with the women, we did focus groups and collected data with them and did interviews. The women felt more at risk after that had the work on male engagement had begun, because what they said was that the men were holding them responsible. So for example, there was an increased insistence on bringing men and women together to the child growth promotion activities. And when a child was found to be malnourished, and that was shared with the family, often when the men returned home, that would increase the risk of gender-based violence because men perceived that women had neglected their children. And this created an increased risk. And this is an example of a phenomenon and a problem. So many times we want programs to insist on, men participating in antenatal care or men participating in child nutrition activities. And what we miss is not just that they are participating, but that we need to clarify how they should engage and how they should be responsible, how they play a supporting role, so that you reduce the risk of gender-based violence for women. Because otherwise, given the prevailing social norms, women might be the ones who are most responsible, who are held responsible for things that when a child becomes malnourished, when a child is not well looked after or neglected or perceived to be neglected, based on the findings when a health provider says a child is not doing well, for example. I do see a question in the chat, Oliver, and I'm thinking I can probably explain some
Yep.
of the first question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, sure.
And maybe if need be, we can invite the person absent if we.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
I was
can
gonna say, Kavita, I think Bill segueing from what you were just talking about to answer that first question makes a lot of sense.
Yes. So this particular question, thank you for asking this question. So one of the reasons we prioritize this focus on consulting women is because it actually comes a little bit from, in the emergency context, if you have any familiarity with accountability to affected populations, there's a big focus on consulting the population that you serve. And I think that this principle applies really well, even in these contexts where you might be in a development context where you're implementing activities to engage men. And one of the key reasons we're suggesting that you need to consult women at first is because in an environment where gender-based violence might be very high, you may find that women are uncomfortable with having men play an important role in young child nutrition. You may also try to understand what their concerns and reservations are, what the difficulties might be. And you might also be able to understand what they perceive as increased risk because of the manner in which women are regarded in their own community. So before starting on working on activities to engage men, it's helpful to really understand from women's perspectives, what are the ways in which they should be engaged? Would they like them to join activities together with women? Are women comfortable doing those activities together with men, or would they prefer that men are included, but in a different way where they might be peer-to-peer activities only with men? So if you're trying to do activities that are, say, couple communication or activities that are going to engage men and women together, it's important to know whether women feel comfortable with that first before starting to jump in and engage men directly. That's the main reason why asking women these questions first is to ensure this is really about ensuring that they feel safe and comfortable in their context to engage men in the way in which you as a project might want to think about engaging them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and just
We
to
have some more.
add,
Some more.
Kavita,
please,
I
go
think, so much of this is around trying to help and support the primary caregiver, which is often women, and, really understanding their needs and what type of help and support they want from their other family members, is really key. I mean, some women may not want their husband to come in and tell them how to breastfeed and, that they're doing it wrong. I could certainly say I would be annoyed if my husband did that to me, So I think just really understanding, like Kavita was saying, what women, see as their roles, men's roles, and being able to even start a conversation, because some programs can try to engage men, but women can actually be the key barrier to really effectively engaging men, because they don't want their help or support, or they don't see if men are engaging in helping, they see them as being less masculine. So having to have conversations to change women's perspectives on men, it is important too. I think it's a two-way street, and I think something that we're trying to emphasize is really having clear conversations, productive dialogue with all family members, to make sure that care needs for the mother and the child in relation to nutrition specifically are addressed. And then just to jump in on the great question, Kelly, I think this is what you were referring to, but in terms of the wins, what are wins for men? And if we can give some examples, and we actually put we have a box in our report on that, but basically, what do men get out of this experience about becoming more involved caretakers and supportive fathers and husbands in related to nutrition and myosin activities? And what we found that actively participating in these activities helps to make can help to make better and stronger relationships for men with their wives and with their children, and that's obviously wonderful. We've seen that men feel more emotionally connected and have more fun playing and relating with their children, and actually sharing decision making. Like I said, a big part of this is conversation. So sharing decision making can also help to resolve conflicts and have more peaceful, respectful dialogues, which I think just helps everyone have a healthier, happier environment. So those are just some of the wins that we see men having from having these experiences. And that's why it also is so important to specifically design your messages to reach and motivate men, so that we're not just taking the women's perspective, but we're understanding what really resonates with them, and how how you can influence men and shape positive outcomes for them and their involvement as well. So it can benefit everyone. So thanks, Stephanie, or Oliver, or Kavita, if you want to jump in on any of that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Lesley. I just wanted to mention one concrete example. There's more research and more findings out there now than in the past, where activities that have done sort of the conflict mitigation using sort of couple dialogue or couple communication are examples where what men report as a part of doing that kind of joint discussion with their wives or with their families, they report sort of more harmonious households, and that helps reduce stress. And we know that in many contexts, as you have an increased risk of any kind of stressors, whether it's climate change, whether it's an economic downturn, those have really negative consequences for women, both in terms of their lives and livelihoods, but especially in terms of increasing gender-based violence. So I think it's really what we're learning from what men say is that they appreciate having those more harmonious households. It makes a big difference for the context in which they live. So that's an example more concretely of a win when you're thinking about what we mean by that. And I think Lisa, go ahead, Oliver.
There are a few, maybe as you answer one or two other questions that, of course, some of them you have already touched. So there's one which talks about so someone posted, "Thank you for a good presentation and reflection. I wondered if there are any good experiences to share relating to monitoring both women's and men's experiences." And then the other one, I think related also, is that was from Lisa, then from Mungabo, says, in speaking to the process of implementation of this gender transformative program, it was mentioned that a way to learn and adapt was by having ongoing reflexivity by the implementer. Could you please tell us how practical it was to do and relate to some of how it was done? Something like that. Yeah, so you want to actually, maybe as you respond some of the issues, touch on these as well.
Sure, Oliver. I can take these two and then have Lesley and Stephanie join as well. So in terms of monitoring, there are some good examples. where, for example, if you're doing safe spaces, it's a great way to get information, particularly from women or from men, particularly when you have peer-to-peer activities, where you might have an opportunity as part of your regular meetings, either monthly or quarterly, you try to do sort of a quick check-in to monitor. So this is more like process evaluation, if you will, to monitor how things are progressing, really getting a sense for whether communities and individuals who are participating in these activities perceive any increased risk. Many times projects are doing activities, but not necessarily focused on using those existing activities to use it for process evaluation. But if you're doing activities around, say, safe spaces that allow men and women to independently, as you know, in two different groups, really share their experiences, that's just one example. And I'm sure there are many more out there, but that's just one example of how you can monitor over the course of a project. And I think this relates to sort of the collaborative learning and adaptation, that if you're able to incorporate that type of monitoring, you can also then use it as a way to be introspective with your team, to really think about how is this going and take stock. So you don't have to monitor on a monthly basis. The changes may not happen that quickly, but if you were to do it quarterly, at least, you know, you have 3 or 4 check-ins a year with the community, with women particularly, and with men particularly, to get an understanding that might help you really understand how to reorient your programming and how to make some changes. So from a practical perspective, it can be done very feasibly, and there can be some important benefits. And Stephanie and Lesley, please jump in if I've missed anything.
Sure, I'll just share that in talking with one of the key informants, they shared how every couple of months they bring together either the community health workers or the community volunteers who are delivering these activities, and bring them together for meetings where they pause and reflect on activities as well as how things are going. And that's an opportunity to see whether or not there's any potential unintended consequences that are coming about from engaging men. And we used a similar approach with our work in Kenya, where we had monthly meetings with peer fathers who were facilitating father discussion groups related to maternal and child nutrition, and providing that opportunity for them to come together and share their experiences facilitating those groups, and what are some of the issues that were coming up and being brought up by the fathers who are in the groups, and then having a chance to sort of problem solve and reflect on those activities together was something that the peer fathers really appreciated.
Great. Yeah, so if there's probably no further questions, maybe it looks like it's time for breakout session, right?
Yes.
The next, yeah.
Oh,
Maybe.
I see there's one more question.
Okay.
Yeah. Hi. So my name is Sarah. I work at Care USA, and I'm very interested in knowing if you received any resistance from religious leaders in the community that you work with, where I would say traditional roles are entrenched into like basically religious interpretation, with men, being more like the outside caregiver, and in the household, the woman being the inside caregiver. And I would like to know if you came into any resistance from them and how you were able to overcome them. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I could start, and then Kavita and Lesley, if you want to add on. I can share an example that I'm familiar with from Nigeria. The Alive and Thrive program in Nigeria worked in Kaduna State to involve fathers in complementary feeding practices. And as part of that, they trained and worked with community and religious leaders and provided sermon guides for how they could integrate messages and ideas around men's roles and activities they could be involved in terms of, especially around purchasing specific complementary foods and sort of building on their roles as providers in their families. That was one approach that was used, and through the interviews with the religious and community leaders, they really valued the training that they received on complementary feeding, and also felt like it was consistent with their role in terms of advising families on how to be healthy. That's one example that I'm familiar with, Kavita, and I'd be happy, I can put those links in the chat to some of the research that was done on those topics. Kavita or Lesley, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I have an example also that I can share that was actually done in Bangladesh quite some time ago. So this was probably concluded in about 2011. There was a project in Bangladesh at the time called the Leaders of Influence Program. And that particular program worked specifically with religious leaders, and that was the main focus. And this was not on nutrition directly, but is very successful in working with religious leaders. So the focus was really on more family planning, and they basically were able to use key elements within the Quran to promote certain positive or optimal practices. And so there was a lot of interest in trying to replicate the same for nutrition. But just to say that it is possible, even in very, challenging topics. And one of the ways in which they did that, in that particular example in Bangladesh, for example, they had to work with the Ministry of Religious Affairs, which was quite well organized in terms of training all of the different religious leaders for the various communities. And they had sort of a training institute, and they were able to then cascade some of this learning so that they could have it scale more easily at the community level. So this was something that they were able to do and had quite a bit of success. So I think it's feasible, but it does require its own set of activities to work with religious leaders in the context of promoting male engagement, in the context of nutrition, in a manner that helps women and is supportive of women as well.
We can, if we have exhausted some of the questions, we can go into breakout session looking at the time.
Sure. Why don't we, we'll have about 10 minutes where we can talk in smaller groups and share experiences. We have some questions that can help guide your conversation in the smaller groups. We thought it'd be nice to hear about your experiences engaging men in maternal, infant, and young child nutrition. Have you had any challenges, had any successes that you'd like to share? And then do you have any suggestions or questions about engaging men based on the principles of do no harm? So we'll use those questions for our small group discussions. We just have about 8 minutes to talk in smaller groups, and then we'll come back as a larger group and report out. And so the rooms are open. Please feel free to join them.
Stephanie, should we just pick a room to join?
I am just going to, send you there now. Looks like people are coming back from their rooms. All right, well, thank you everyone so much for sharing experiences during your groups. I see we're at the hour. It always goes by so fast. We had a great discussion in our group, and I can see from Lisa that they did in theirs as well. And I'm sure that Oliver and Kavita's group had a nice discussion. Thank you everyone for participating today. We're so excited to see you, and we will be sending out a follow-up email with the resources that we've talked about during the meeting today, and also with more information about plans for 2024. If you have a project or activity that you would like to share as part of the Find COP, either through our listserv or during one of our webinars, please email me. I will be sending out the next email, so you will be able to get in touch with me. We'd love to feature your work and to share your experience. I really would like to thank Oliver, Kavita, and Lesley for sharing and presenting today, and all of you for being here with us. I hope you have a great rest of the year and a wonderful 2024. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
You.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.